And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman. As you see, I'm still out of the studio on a family vacation up in the Northeast. We're in New Hampshire this week, just a spectacular part of the country. But today I could not keep my eyes off of the television watching Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel speak to a joint session of Congress for the fourth time. Really just an incredible moment in history, just in political history and the history of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. I can tell you that it was a risky move for Prime Minister Netanyahu in a very difficult time, both in Israel and here in the United States. In Israel, as you know, there's a war going on in at least three fronts. In Gaza with Hamas, in the north with Hezbollah, and in Judea and Samaria on the West Bank with all of those factions and more. It's a really tough, tumultuous time in Israel regarding Netanyahu's popularity or lack thereof. There's a lot of fatigue on the war. People are behind the war. People know that the war needs to be completed. We need victory. We need to continue to victory. There obviously is still a push towards a deal at any cost. That's the quote-unquote ceasefire now crowd. We're going to do a separate episode on that. But that's just to give you a little bit of the background of what's happening in Israel and why it's so risky, but also obviously risky for Netanyahu to come to the United States to a joint session of Congress just now in the moments that we're in here in the United States in the midst of a contentious presidential campaign. The Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, who was supposed to preside over the hearing, decided not to. She will be meeting with him separately. That's definitely a statement being made by Kamala, but also I think the number was 34 at the end of members of Congress that skipped out on it, including Thomas Massie from the Republican side, and the rest were Democrats. Vice President J.D. Vance, Vice Presidential candidate J.D. Vance also skipped, but he put out a statement saying how much he supports Israel and the Prime Minister, just that he was in Texas campaigning with President Trump. It's yet to be seen if we will see Vance with President Trump meeting with Netanyahu on Friday in Mar-a-Lago in Florida. But Netanyahu took the invitation. Many people think this was an invitation just by Speaker Johnson. It wasn't. It was his initiative, but it was a joint invitation by Johnson, McConnell, Schumer, and Jeffries all together. And he accepted that invitation like he should in this very difficult but also important time. Of note, we saw Elon Musk there, which is also interesting. Elon Musk obviously taking a bigger political role these days. It was good to see him there. He visited Israel earlier this year with Ben Shapiro and some other folks. Also went to Auschwitz on a trip where he gave a powerful speech. So anyway, it was a really, really important day. First thing I wanted to, as far as reacting to the speech, which just finished, the first thing that jumped out at me is that Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked President Biden for his support, for decades of support of the state of Israel, and calling himself openly a Zionist who supports Israel, an Irish-American Zionist is what Biden says, according to Netanyahu. I thought it was a very smart political move these days. It is divisive. Israel is a divisive issue. It is becoming a partisan issue, unfortunately, and obviously that's something that's dangerous, not just for the Jewish community here in America, but for Israel. So it was important for him to start by tipping his hat to President Biden. I thought that was critical actually for him to do. The next thing that jumped out that was really on a personal note was Netanyahu called out the story of a soldier who was a commander in Shaldag, which is the Delta Force unit of the Israeli Defense Forces, 39 years old, father of 6, who was killed in action in the beginning of November. Moshe Leiter's father was in the stands. He's a native of Scranton, Pennsylvania, who moved to Israel decades ago and actually previously worked for Netanyahu in the 90s. Moshe's father did. And he shared Moshe Leiter's father, Yechiel's story and the line, the words that he shared in his son's funeral, which were very, very strong. The reason why it's a personal note is Moshe Leiter, may his memory be a blessing, and may God avenge his blood. Moshe was a close friend of mine and my wife's in Israel for many, many years. So to see him get the respect and the recognition that he deserves and that every fallen soldier deserves, not just in Israel, but in the United States, but on such a big stage, was very difficult to process. I say that because on one hand, it was heartwarming. Really was happy to see. I'm excited to speak to Moshe's family about it, see how they felt about it. obviously heartbreaking, because nobody wants their friend to be in that position and their friend's family to be in that position, but it was still beautiful for the Prime Minister to recognize him, and it was a nice surprise for me and my family. Also, Netanyahu brought 3 soldiers with him on his delegation. It was very interesting. He brought a Jewish soldier and a Muslim soldier and a Bedouin soldier. Just incredible to see the different elements, the different races and religions that live in the state of Israel and that serve side by side. It's something that if you visit Israel, you see with your eyes. It's clear, it's easy, but here in America, we don't see it, and the narrative is very different these days. So just bringing them and recognizing their service and their incredible heroic stories was very powerful. Also in the audience was Noa Argamani, who was held hostage in Gaza by Hamas. She was there, and the Prime Minister shared her story and the story of her mother, who was dying of cancer when she was kidnapped, when Noa was kidnapped, her daughter, and her dying wish was to see her daughter once again before she died, and that actually happened in a daring rescue mission that the IDF launched, and where they rescued Noa. So that was spectacular to bring her and also family members of others, including the Bibi family, the 2 toddlers who are kidnapped and have been longer. One of them has been held in captivity longer than he has lived his life out of captivity. So it's really just some of the worst stories that are still ongoing. People have a fatigue on the war in Israel here in the United States and abroad, but in Israel it's very much ongoing, and an ongoing open wound that needs to be resolved. The way that Netanyahu threaded the needle of staying away from American politics, but also proving and making the case as to why support of Israel is support for the United States interests, I thought was critical. He didn't say that specifically or explicitly, but he went through it one by one in a way that I thought was very compelling and very important in these days when people are asking, why are we spending money abroad? He really explained it. Just a few highlights from Netanyahu that I'll share with you if you haven't seen the whole speech. Netanyahu said emphatically, our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight. Our victory will be your victory. That was a tremendous moment in the speech after laying out his support for the United States and is thanking the United States for everything that they've done, telling the stories of those he brought with him. He literally just laid out that our enemies in Israel are your enemies in the United States. Our fight in Israel is your fight in the United States, and our victory in Israel will be your victory here in the United States. I thought that was a tremendous message. He tied it to Iran and explaining how Iran has the goal of spreading its caliphate all over the world, and that the United States is the big Satan, America is just the small, Israel is just the small Satan, America is the big Satan, and that to be able to get to America, it needs to go through Israel first, and Israel won't allow that to happen. The Prime Minister then turned to the northern border, to the war with Hezbollah. He did not name Hezbollah directly, but he did say clearly and emphatically that Israel will do whatever it must do to restore peace to our northern border and to return our residents to their communities in the north. Most people don't know that almost 100,000 Israelis have been displaced from their homes in the north of Israel because they're under constant rocket fire, anti-missile rocket fire, quote-unquote anti-missile rocket fire from Hezbollah directly to these towns on a daily basis since October 7th. Those people are living in hotels and hostels spread out throughout the country. They need to be brought home. That's not a way to run a country. We shouldn't have 1/3 of the country in Israel being displaced. They said that they will work diplomatically, but they will do whatever they have to do to restore peace to the northern border. This is the world's biggest stage, being at the joint session of Congress. So to hear Prime Minister Netanyahu say that, it was clear that he was speaking to Hezbollah and trying to convince them through strength to push back, because if not, Israel will push them back. The next thing he said to that end, he spoke about the Houthis, who have been attacking the United States troops on a weekly basis also since mid-October, who sent a drone that was the size of a vehicle that landed in the center of Tel Aviv, killed 1, injured 10. Just days later, I think 2 days later, Israel launched a very strong attack back to the Houthis, or against the Houthis. And he then looked at the camera and said clearly, those who attack Israel will pay a very, very heavy price. Again, a very strong statement from Israel's leader, something that in the Middle East, they know and they understand there's only one language that's understood in the Middle East, and that's strength. And that's something that I think we have to learn here in the United States, particularly when dealing with actors in the Middle East. Then he turned to America, and really this was sort of the crescendo of his speech. Prime Minister Netanyahu looked at the crowd, looked at the joint session of Congress, even though some people were missing, he didn't address that at all. And he says, "I know America has our back." And that's on both sides of the aisle. Those were Netanyahu's words. And I thank you for it. It's just such a critical message for him to say. You can't come to the House, you can't come to the joint session of Congress where you've received military aid and support and not say thank you. It's not overlooked, it's not just words, it's not political theater like some people think. It's critical, it's critically important, and I'm glad to have heard him do that. And then he turned to the joint efforts between the United States and Israel, where he said, we jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons in the world that protect both of our interests. Again, talking about the mutual interest, the mutual aid that each country provides to one another. Then he said that we help keep American boots off the ground. We, Israel, help keep American boots off the ground, says Netanyahu, while protecting American interests in the Middle East. Again, this is Netanyahu speaking directly to the crowd that is asking for an explanation beyond politics, beyond history, beyond religion. Why does the United States have to support Israel? And the answer is right there. Those two answers. First, we jointly developed some of the most sophisticated weapons that protect both of our interests. And next, we help keep American boots off the ground while protecting America's interests in the Middle East. Critically important, straight to the point, and that's something that was a message that I'm sure Netanyahu was much looking forward to making to the American public. And then he turned to the aid. Look, the United States has been providing military aid and equipment to Israel, but it's been proven already that the Biden administration has been slow-rolling that aid, slow-rolling that slowing down the transfer of the military equipment, just sort of taking it off the fast track, just through regular, ordinary course of business, as if Israel's not in the middle of the war. So Netanyahu, who's a historian himself, brought up the famous quote by Churchill to America, where Churchill said, "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job." And Netanyahu ended with, "Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster." Very specific request from the Prime Minister just to speed up the transfer of the weapons so they can continue the war more quickly. That's also in line with President Trump, who has said that Israel needs to finish the job more quickly. Prime Minister Netanyahu is there in public saying, "Give us the tools faster and we'll finish the job faster." And then he concludes just saying thank you again and saying that together we, the United States and Israel, will defend I can't even read my own handwriting from my notes, our common culture, our common communities, and our common interests. In conclusion, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu really did a great job addressing a divided Congress at a divided time in both in the United States and in Israel. Real risky move, but he is a brilliant orator who has spent his entire career making very important speeches in very difficult moments. His message was delivered. He thanked the American people. He stayed above the political fray, both in Israel and in the United States, which is not an easy task. He tipped his hat to the heroes, to the soldiers, to those who are fighting today, to those who have fallen. He talked about the hostages, how he will never abandon the hostages, and that his heart is with them at all times, and he's going to do everything he can to bring them all home, which is an important message for people to hear. And at the end of the day, he thanked America and tied Israel as much as possible to America with its shared interests and values. And that's it. That's our quick point for today. What a historical day today. I'm here out in Rhode Island on a family vacation. I had to stay back just to watch this speech, such a historical moment with so much significance in the coming months. Thanks for your support. Make sure to follow, like, subscribe, do all the great things you do to support podcasts, and we'll see you next time.